All right, Winning Plays podcast is back. My name is Brian Robb, joined today by the one and only Tom Westerholm, sports reporter extraordinaire at Boston.com. Follow him on Twitter at Tom_NBA. I think you also have an is at by Tom Westerholm still active somewhere? Is that in the archives?
It exists. If you wanna go back through my thoughts on like Springfield high school basketball from like 2015 to 2017, you'll find some great takes in there. Shout out Ty Nichols, shout out Tyon Malone, shout out Taylor Martin, just absolute studs, fun guys to cover.
All right, we'll be digging into that later in the show, but for now, let's start. Boston Celtics have won. What is this? Is it like, I want to say like 20 of 23, something crazy. Yeah. In the last 2 minutes. I mean, we know, I think like 26-7 over their last 33 games. Wrapped up a 4-game road trip with another blowout win in Oklahoma City that got a little tight at the end on Monday night. Tom, Celtics have 9 games left. They are tied for the number 2 seed with the Sixers and the Bucks right now. And I'll leave it to you. You're the guest here. Do we want to talk about the trip, or do we want to talk about the standings and the jockeying in the Eastern Conference playoff picture? Because I think that's going to be the most fascinating subplot ever to see how, like, I think it's already honestly kind of started with guys already getting rested on certain teams. So what direction do you want to go on here?
Yeah, let's do the standings, because we could touch on the road trip real quick. It's just like, they played great, right? It's like, it's almost like nothing left to really say. Like we've seen this team play great since the start of 2022, and they kept it up on the road trip, which, like, very impressive, but like, I don't have much more to add. Yeah. Tatum's like a superstar. These guys play great defense. Jalen's really good. So I don't know. Those are my thoughts on the road trip, but I think the jockeying is really interesting, because I think one of the things that you can look at, right, is like the Sixers do not seem like they want to play the Nets at all. Like They just seem a little bit shook by having to play Brooklyn in the first round. And I kind of understand that, but I'm curious what you think. Like, I think the Celtics should probably I'm sure they would rather not play the Nets, but at the same time, I don't know that they have to fear the Nets. Like, sure, you'd rather have an easier team. You'd rather not have to play Kevin Durant if you can avoid playing Kevin Durant, but like, the Celtics are good. Like, they've been better than the Nets for a significant stretch here. I don't know. I'm curious what you think, but if I'm the Celtics, I would rather not play them, but I'm not scared to.
Right. And that's where how Ime Udoka handles the situation is going to be fascinating to me, because I think in the old world, the Brad Stevens world, like, you know, they're just going to, hey, we're going to let the chips fall where they may. Like, we're going to play hard to the end. Like, obviously they'll rest guys if they need to, but they're not going to just rest guys to position. Ime, I figure he's going to be on the other side of the coin in terms of being like, I mean, all year long, he's been upfront in terms of telling us straight up, like, what they're doing, what they're trying to do, whether it's, you know, we're going after LaMelo Ball at the end of this game. Of course we are. Like, we're targeting his ass every time down the floor. And I think, I mean, at the same time, to your point though, they're 26-7 in their last 33 games. And it's been it's not like they could probably be even better than that. They've lost a couple of close games in there. They haven't like squeaked out a couple there. So the Celtics on paper shouldn't be afraid of anyone right now if they continue playing like this. The question I still get back to is being like, all right, well, that may be true, but if you can have like one of Brooklyn and Milwaukee take each other out, and you have the likes of the Cavs or the Bulls or even the Raptors, who I think they're feisty teams, but whatever, like you take those teams 9 times out of 10 over Kevin Durant. Like, to me, that is still ultimately the play here, because as much as like, oh yeah, they're playing really well, like, it could all go, a feel-good story could end in a hurry if once Kevin Durant goes for 50 in 4 games in the first round and you lose in 7.
100%. I think the counter, though, is like, I think one of the things that's been going really well for the Celtics is just this like unbridled, like, yeah, just like win everything, like play well all the time, play the right way all the time. And it's like, it's almost kind of, kind of an idealistic way to look at basketball, I think, like that kind of like, well, you should always just play the right way and then things will work out. Like, that's not always true. But I do think that that's part of the reason that things are working out for the Celtics. So if you start really, focusing on the standings. And if you start like looking like, well, we would rather not be here at the 2, we're probably not going to get to the 1. So maybe we'd be better off going down to the 4 and resting some guys. I don't know. I wonder if that would affect the way that guys approach games, the way that they, and maybe the way they approach the playoffs. Like, I'm not sure what you think. It does seem like there's a certain amount of what's going on with the Celtics right now that is momentum, and it's momentum that's being driven by playing the right way, but it also is like, things are rolling, the vibes are great. Grant Williams is Batman, everybody's happy. And, I don't know that you want to risk everybody being happy when it's, we've seen what it looks like when people aren't, and that was the first half of the season. And now we've seen what it looks like when they are. And it's like, yeah, I mean, the second half of the season feels like something that's worth, kind of trying to preserve in that way.
That's a good point, because like, what's the message to your guys if you're taking your foot off the gas?
Exactly.
Okay, we've won 26 of 33, but all right, like let's slow our roll here. Like we're gonna take some time off. We're only gonna play you guys like 25 minutes. Like that, they're gonna be like, that's bullshit. Like we're 2.5 games behind the Heat for the 1 seed. And I think you've reached a point where I agree with you in the sense of like maybe you do some positioning at the very, very end of the season if things begin to get settled there, and it's a matter of like, okay, if we can, we'll sit everyone in the second half of this back-to-back, and then we can secure the 3 seed. But there's enough time left, and the 1 seed, it's only 2.5 games back, and you're going to play Miami head-to-head there. So it's like, if you take care of business there, like anything is in play at this point. So I think you just convinced me, because you're right. It's like you can't mess with the vibes of this team right now on the off chance that like, just so you think for sure you'll avoid Brooklyn. I don't think they're scary enough for you to go that route.
I think that's the key part is like, are these teams really like, the message to your team, if you start resting guys, is like, well, that team's a little too scary for us. And I just don't think you want to tell these guys in kind of the mental space and the basketball space that they're in, that anybody is too scary. Because if you're the Celtics right now, you're looking at it like, yeah, I mean, Brooklyn's good, but we just beat them and, it blew them out like, twice when they didn't have their stars. Like they've played really well against Brooklyn this year. You look at Milwaukee, like Milwaukee's tough, but they've played against Milwaukee pretty well at times this year as well. Like, I don't, I'm just not sure that the message you want to send to these guys is, yeah, we're a little scared that you guys can't handle them. I think just kind of like brash confidence might be the way to approach these playoffs.
And for that record, like if you have, like I said, if you have title aspirations, you can't be dodging teams in the first round. And I think at this point, they've played well enough here where that is, very much on the table. Like, yeah, they're not going to be, I mean, who knows? They could be slight underdogs in the first round series against Brooklyn, just based on if they have everyone good to go. But the longer Ben Simmons looks like, if he's back for the playoffs, like he's certainly going to be rusty. Like he certainly won't have probably his full like sea legs under him. And then Kyrie, I mean, the vaccine thing in New York, there's still really no signs of that changing yet. So like, especially with Durant just calling out the mayor, like probably like the dumbest thing you could do. Like, oh yeah, like put this guy on blast. Yeah, now he's going to change it for you. Like, no, now he's going to, that'd be like, bowing down to you guys. So it's the longer that goes on, like it's, and with all the changes that all these teams have had outside of Milwaukee, there's been obviously a ton of overhaul for a lot of these teams across the team. And beyond adding White and a guy in Theis who pretty much has played with these guys for 3 years before he left here, like you're probably has as much continuity as any team in the East right now.
Well, and you talk about Kyrie, and I think Kyrie is obviously an unbelievable scorer, but if you're the Celtics, I mean, the last game you played against Brooklyn, one of the big reasons that they won that game was because they just picked on Kyrie so much on the other end, right? Like, so even there, it's like, yeah, I mean, like they've got tons of firepower, and yeah, like I think Ben Simmons is kind of the wild card here because he is the one guy on that team who can consistently, defend Tatum at a reasonable level. I mean, you could have Durant do it, but I mean, you're at that point, you're exerting a lot of energy for KD on the defensive end when you need him to get buckets. Like, Simmons has defended Tatum pretty well in the past. So I understand that, that element of it. But even so, I wrote a story on Boston.com. Like, there were, I mean, probably 15 to 20 plays, like baskets that the Celtics scored against the Nets that were a pretty direct result of them just targeting Kyrie and being like, nope, we're going to go after you and either get a bucket or like what we get as a result of, the mismatch and the switch that happens there. So, yeah, I mean, look, you don't want to play Kevin Durant, but at the same time, like, I think they can beat the Nets. Again, like you said, maybe they're slight underdogs. Maybe they're not. I don't know. I think they could beat Brooklyn if they, again, maybe they do, maybe they don't, but I think they could do it.
The other subplot here for any of these teams thinking about positioning is that the bottom half of the East is still very unsettled. Brooklyn looks like they're going to be in a play-in situation, but they're still only 3 games back of the Cavs with 9 to play. But the Cavs have been like ravaged by injuries.
Yep.
So if Brooklyn gets hot there, and you can bet your ass they're going to be trying to get out of a play-in and scenario. And, especially if Toronto's in that 7th seed, like that's obviously a nightmare one where you would, wouldn't have Kyrie on the road for that one, no matter what. And so that could be a situation here. And I guess that's just another reason for the Celtics not even think about this until things become a lot more settled in the last week of the season to be like, okay, just keep winning right now. The 1 seed's still in play. And yeah, Brooklyn, they could be anywhere from 6 to 8, or even, 6 to 9. Charlotte's like a game behind them too. So if they go in the other direction, they're like, they might be stuck, playing for the 8th seed when everything's said and done. So it's just wild, just the amount of spontaneity that's in play here for both sides of the bracket. It's honestly going to make a hell of a final couple weeks of the regular season, because usually all this stuff is locked in weeks ahead of time, and then it makes for like a really boring, slow burn to the start of the playoffs anyway.
Yeah, like you were saying, like I think that's the fun thing about the Eastern Conference this year, is that there really isn't a ton of motivation to try to do like much finagling, because like you said, literally anybody could end up anywhere still. It's like once you've divided up the tiers, the mixing and matching in the tiers is going to be impossible to predict until the last couple of games of the season. And I don't know. That's been really fun to watch, because I do think that like most of the Eastern Conference teams are flawed in some way or another, with the possible exception of the Celtics at this point, because it's like, Miami feels like they don't have like that 1A star, Chicago obviously has their issues. You can just kind of go down the list, and there's like easy things to pinpoint with every one of those teams. But there's a lot of really good teams at the same time. So I don't know. I've enjoyed that about the East this year. Is just like kind of, there's a certain parity in terms of everybody's got their flaw that everybody else is going to try to exploit. And it's also it also means that as the playoffs approach, you just have no idea where people are going to land.
Who do you like? Who's your top opponents right now for Boston, best case scenario in the first round? Has Chicago, Chicago's really, they have a really fun team, but they have really reeled of late. They've lost 7 of 10. They're slowly starting to get healthy. Patrick Williams was back last night, but it sounds like Lonzo, they shut him down for the next 10 days. So it looks, having him back for the first round, probably the huge question mark at this point, if he's not progressing. So you have that, the Cavs, Jared Allen is supposed to be back. Obviously from a talent standpoint, they can't mix, but they've been a really gritty defensive team all year. And then, or even a team like Toronto, which, they play really hard, but, the Celtics have certainly had their way with them a couple times this year, it seems like.
Yeah, not to counteract literally everything I just said, but like the Nets are, of course, like the worst possible one.
Let's be real here, Tom.
Yeah, look, that's not to me. It just doesn't matter as much. Like if you're the Celtics, it doesn't matter as much. Like in terms of it's too early to predict like where you're going to be able to end up. But any of those 3 teams, I would feel pretty confident with. I do think that there is a pretty good case to be made that Chicago might be the best one. As good as I like a lot of their team. I like a lot of players on their team, but just, guys who, when you look at like opposing scorers like DeMar and, like Zach LaVine, like those guys, like the Celtics are so good defensively that like those guys are not guys that like I think could beat the Celtics 4 times out of 7. And I think offensively, the Celtics would have a lot of fun playing against the Bulls. Like there's not a great matchup for either of the Celtics' 2 best players on that team defensively. So I would probably say Chicago. Injuries to Cleveland. I think either Chicago or Cleveland would be the two. The Raptors, I do think the Celtics would win that pretty handily, but like you said, they play really hard. Nick Nurse knows how to coach a playoff team. He knows how to junk things up for sure. So they would probably be my, of those three teams, they'd probably be my lowest. But yeah, I think Chicago would be a very winnable matchup for the Celtics in the first round. I don't think I would, you can make the case for Cleveland, but I think the Celtics would score a lot of points against that Bulls team.
Yeah, I think you're dead on that. And the Bulls point too, I think everyone forgets. I mean, DeMar DeRozan's having an amazing year, but I think people forget about his postseason track record.
That's very true.
In terms of like, this is a guy who, yeah, for years and years, like Toronto was like unbeatable in the regular season. Like they were going to take down the Cavs. And then year after year, DeRozan was just pretty close to a no-show in those series. And I mean, San Antonio, he wasn't, I think they were made it like once there and he was like okay in a series, but it's still, that's certainly not, that's where I mean, there's a lot of reasons why Tatum and Brown like are better than DeRozan, but you just look at the postseason track records of those guys. And it's like, yeah, Tatum and Brown historically have been able to kind of match their regular season production, which a lot of guys just cannot do in the postseason. Yeah. And I think is a very underrated quality as opposed to a DeRozan and a Zach LaVine, who honestly hasn't been in the postseason much, period. So there's not much to track, but like that 1 year in Minnesota. So yeah, that adding that subplot with the defense, like you talked about, makes them, I think, probably one where a ton are going to be gunning for. Because even a team like Cleveland, it's like, yeah, you probably take care of them, but they're going to at least get after defensively. And that's, going to make it more of a challenge than a Chicago team where you're probably just going to be able to outgun them.
And I think, too, there is an element of Cleveland where I don't think they're probably going to win their first round, but they're all young and they're all enthusiastic. Okay. And if there's one thing we learned about young and enthusiastic teams in 2018, it's that they could make noise. Like, it's not impossible that they make noise. So, yeah, I mean, I think, like you said, that the DeRozan point is really good. And I think as we watch the Celtics, as we watch the Jalen and Jason get better and better, that is something that's a good point about their playoff production. Like that's kind of exciting, right? That like, hey, Tatum's averaging 26.9 points per game this season, and I don't know if that's up to 27 after his game yesterday, but he's putting up really impressive numbers, and you can kind of count on those numbers to translate. He is the type of player who can do that. So yeah, no, that's a good point, and yeah, we'll stick with my Chicago pick. I think that's a good one.
Where are you on the Sixers right now? Have you seen much of this? I mean, it's been a bit of a mess for them in the last couple of weeks. Are you of the mind that, they're still a team, like, would you rather see them versus over like the Heat or something like that in the second round or even the first round series? I mean, the Heat's obviously not in play for the Celtics in the first round, but it's conceivable the Celtics and Sixers could play in like a 4 or 5 matchup, something like that. If Milwaukee jumps up there, like, and the Bulls make a little more noise, like, where do you think they're going to figure this out in Philly, or do you think that they are going to be just a work in progress based on how this is looking right now?
I mean, look, I think if you can end up with the Sixers in the second round, if you could jump the Bucks and keep the Sixers in there, if you're the Celtics, I think you're ecstatic. Like, yeah. I'm not a huge believer in the Sixers team. I'm not a huge believer in. I think 2022 James Harden is still a dangerous player, but I think he's just clearly not 2017 James Harden, and even 2017 James Harden struggled in the playoffs. So, you've got that element. You got the facts that the Celtics do play they play well against Joel Embiid. He just has never been able to crack their code. And then when he finally started to, Al Horford came back. So I don't love this Sixers team in the first place. I think that there's real flaws on that team, and there's especially real flaws in terms of them trying to defend Tatum and Brown. There always have been. And, we just haven't seen enough from them to make you think like, wow, that's a team the Celtics should be. I mean, we certainly haven't seen anything that makes you think the Celtics should be concerned about them. The last time they played, Celtics beat them by a record amount. So, yeah, I mean, look, I think I would certainly, if I'm the Celtics, I would 100% rather see the Sixers than the Heat. And obviously I'd rather see them than the Bucks. So, if there's finagling that you can do at the end of the season, maybe it should be more about trying to like set up that second round matchup as opposed to a first rounder.
It is. I mean, you're right. Cause if you can, I think the dream would be something along the lines of, like I said, Celtics Philly at like 2-3, and then, Brooklyn at like 6 or something like that. So Philly's got to play Brooklyn in the first round. And so then you obviously have to get whoever you get there. But then Milwaukee and Miami have to take each other out in the second round, apparently. And then if you only have to go through one of those teams to get to the finals, or the Eastern Conference Finals, I should say, then that's pretty close to a dream scenario.
Yeah. Yeah, absolutely. I mean, yeah. Like, what do you think about the Heat? Do you think that they're, because I'm not a huge believer. I know they've won a lot of games and they've been playing well, but I don't know. I would have my concerns about them if I were a Heat fan, I guess, in the playoffs.
Yeah, I mean, they lost to Philly on Monday night without Embiid and Harden in the lineup. And I think, defensively, they're going to be a bear. But, I mean, Lowry hasn't played a ton this year. I know he's been away from the team a lot for personal reasons. Then, Butler and Bam have both been out for long injury stints too. I mean, the scary part of Miami for me still is, Tyler Herro coming back into the bubble form again against the Celtics like that. That's a reasonable concern there. And I'm not sure, like, Derek White's going to be able to slow him down in that type of scenario if he, is playing at that level. But at the same time, you're right. Like, the rest of the team, they've kind of just like cobbled together with a lot of guys that are, end of the bench, the Max Struses of the world, the Gabe Vincent's guys, really fun stories. But then you get to the postseason and you're like, okay, that fun story might not be as fun in a high, competitive environment like this.
Fun stories are a regular season game,
right?
It's like the big boys play in the postseason. Like, yeah, I think too, it's like, if you kind of break down all of that, if your concern is Tyler Herro, it's like, well, the concern for the Heat is Jason Tatum and Jaylen Brown. Like, it's like, that's I like, because Jimmy Butler, I mean, look, at this stage, like, I mean, I don't know. I know he's, an accomplished postseason player and everything, but like, he gives you such nothing in terms of spacing. And, I mean, look, I know the Heat have won games in the past. I know they made it to the finals in 2020, but like, we haven't really seen the Heat look like that team since, besides like the stretches during the regular season this year. So yeah, I mean, look, if I'm the Celtics, the two teams that I would like, if I were really trying to choose who not to play, I would choose the Nets, even though I don't think they should try to avoid them. And I would try to avoid the Bucks, because I think the Bucks are just a sleeping giant to me. But I mean, every other team in the East, it's like, I don't know that the Celtics are going to beat them, but like, I certainly think that it's, I would probably pick them over any of those other teams.
Yeah. And now, especially the Bucks are getting Brook Lopez back too, on top of it. And it sounds like, you're the defending champs and you have the continuity experience there, even though I think some of the supporting cast pieces are weaker in Milwaukee this year, which gives you an opening if you're the Celtics. But there's no question that'll be a bear of a series no matter what. No matter how well the Celtics are playing, that's going to be a bear of a series. The one thing, okay, you talked me out of the rest situation for the Celtics here. How are you handling Al Horford and Rob Williams down these next 3 weeks, though? Because that's the one thing to me where it's like, okay, like everyone else is, Tatum, Brown, they can play all the minutes in a row right now and they seem to be fine. They're, rolling. Those are the guys, it's like, you can't lose either of those guys, because then, not that you're, I mean, yeah, I'm going to say, yeah, if you lose one of those guys, your finals chances are torpedoed. Like, it's the obvious ones, it's like your core pieces, but I think either of those bigs, like defensively, if you lose one of those guys, like you're pretty much toast. So how do you handle those guys down the stretch now if you're Ime and trying to win games, but also knowing that like we don't want to risk anything too much?
Well, it's tough because it's pretty much everybody, right? Like, you can't lose Jaylen or Jason, obviously.
Yeah, right.
Like you said, Al or Rob torpedoes you. Marcus seems to torpedo you. I mean, the Thunder put up 123 points yesterday, and like
Trey Mann just going nuts.
Exactly. Yeah. Like, I think Smart might have made a little difference on Trey Mann. So yeah, I mean, I think that kind of goes back to like, it kind of goes back to the messaging element of it, right? Because if you tell the Celtics, like if you tell players, hey, we're going to rest you here because we think we have a chance to make it to the finals, we think we have a chance to make a deep run, and you're a huge part of that, I think that's a different conversation than, hey, we're trying to avoid the nets. Hey, we're trying to avoid the, so instead of telling people like, we're trying to avoid the 8 seed, we're trying to avoid, playing the nets. We're trying to avoid, getting into the 3 seed. You're just saying, we believe in you guys. Please go out and try to win. But like, we're going to start resting guys because we just believe in this core. So to me, I don't know, that just seems like a different thing to tell people than, I don't want to play Team X. It's more just, nope, we need everybody here to be healthy. So whatever we have to do to keep everybody healthy, let's do that. And let the chips fall where they may in terms of seeding.
Who is in, does Theis sneak into your playoff rotation based on how he's looked? Or is he literally just a break in case of emergency situation at this point? Because I guess, White's in there. I think it's safe to say Pritchard's played himself into playoff minutes. And then, Grant is certainly going to play to some extent. And so I guess the question is like, I mean, it seems obviously to go with just 8, but I don't know, like Theis has actually looked good enough here to me where you wonder where to keep guys minutes down and among those bigs and to kind of protect them a little bit. And in the right matchup, like maybe he could be useful in one of these series.
Yeah, to me, he feels like a spot minutes guy, like not necessarily somebody who's, not necessarily somebody who knows that he's going in at the 4-minute mark of the first quarter every single game or whatever it might be, but somebody who, yeah, like you said, break glass. Maybe it's break glass in case of minor inconvenience, right? Like it's not an emergency right. Because Theis does play well, but I don't think he's somebody, especially given the way that like you said, it makes sense to go with 8. Especially given the way that Payton's been playing, especially given the way that Grant's played all season, the spacing that those guys give you. To me, it feels like he's just kind of that. Maybe he will, maybe he won't. He might on Tuesday, but he won't on Friday. That type of player.
Anything else sticking out to you about this team right now before we wrap? Like, I mean, we got into the trip a little bit here. The numbers kind of speak for themselves, but like whether it's a short-term development, a long-term development for any, I mean, you could literally almost pick anyone on the roster here. I don't know if they're like beyond Derek White's like bad shooting slump, which isn't really matter when you're winning games. Like, who cares? Like what's sticking out to you the most about like anything across the board here?
One of the things that I guess one of the things I've been kind of interested in, I mean, obviously Pritchard's been shooting so well, and it really does kind of feel like the difference between him and Schroeder in terms of fit is so striking because, Schroeder was obviously always needed the ball in his hands. He was at his best when he was attacking, trying to get into the paint, all that stuff. Like that should be, and now is, Tatum and Jalen's job, because when those guys get into the paint, it like, defenses are just absolutely panicking. You can see like 5 guys all sucking into the hoop. And then, Pritchard literally just target practice for him. So I think early in the season, before the season started, I kind of made like a devil's advocate case that maybe Pritchard should be, a starting guard. Maybe it should be, Smart, Pritchard, Jalen, Tatum, and then either Al or Rob. And obviously they ended up going, double big, and that's worked out great. But I do think that the argument, the devil's advocate argument that I made at the start of the season still kind of applies to Pritchard, right? Because he's been such a good shooter and such a good fit next to wings who attack out of the pick and roll. I just think that makes everything nice and easy for him, and kind of gives him a chance to settle in a little bit. So I don't know. I mean, I think Pritchard's been really good, and I think he's I think he's kind of building his future nicely right now.
Yeah, I mean, the amount of crunch time reps he's gotten in these few weeks, I think is eye-opening. To your point, like it's not just, oh yeah, he's hitting some shots here. It's like, no, he's, even before he had that 9 of 9 stretch, he was playing crunch time over Derek White in like a few important games, including like against the Mavs and stuff like that. So I agree. Like it's almost like they just turned back the clock to the beginning of last season. It's like, oh yeah, remember when he like tore it up when Kemba was out and he had to be like our top scoring guard off the bench for a while and impress the hell out of everyone. Like, yeah, like that, we probably want to get back into that. And to Brad Stevens' credit, like he did it. Like he pulled the plug, literally gave away Schroeder for nothing. I mean, they got that Theis out of it, but that was just pretty much addition by subtraction there.
Yeah.
And yeah, this is, I mean, if he can sustain this, like suddenly the Celtics bench goes from being like, oh, like, do they have anyone who can help? Being like, okay, you have to start accounting for almost everyone on the floor between Grant and him and Derek, who's at least, he may not be hitting him, but he's certainly going to get him up quickly. He has a quick release. So like, you can't just ignore him out there.
Well, and he's a good player, right? Like, it's like,
right.
Whether he's making shots or not, he's still, the Celtics are still, something like 9 points better when he's on the floor. Like he is still contributing. I do think it's kind of funny that the Celtics managed to, like, 2 of the additions to the roster that they made were both guys that they pretty much did for the vibes. Like, right. Like Malik Fitz is on the team because he's got great celebrations. Yeah. Daniel Theis is on the team because like he knows all the guys and they all like him. Like,
right.
It's like, you're in a pretty good spot if literally 2 of your roster spots are just filled because it's like, hey, I like that guy. He's a good dude. Like, that's working out for him. So,
yeah. Malik Fitz has a dream job right now. He's just,
oh my gosh, just doing his little guitar.
All the moves. We need to hear from him. We need to hear like, how many he has in his like when he figures out he signs with the Celtics. Like, okay, I need to realize this is what I need to, like, those 2 10-day contracts being like, how do I stick out here beyond the 3 minutes of garbage time? Like, I really have to like play everyone up on the bench.
Yeah, he's not like getting extra shots up. He's got a whiteboard in his house where he's just like writing down ideas for new celebrations and then crossing that one out and kind of reordering. It's like he's got to, he's got to prep. It's all about preparation.
Oh man. And now we have, and I as well end on this, Aaron Nesmith heading up to Maine for some run apparently tonight, along with Fitz and Stauskas. It's not worth entertaining. Like, is he going to be in the playoff rotation? No, he's not going to be in the playoff rotation here. Like, but you do wonder at this point, it's like, there's a kind of a big 10 games for him to end the regular season here. To at least, like, if you can convince Ime Udoka to at least think about like turning to you as like a wild card energy option in, the playoffs, as opposed to being like, all right, you're on, we'll see you in Summer League, Aaron. Like, I wonder again how much of a chance he'll get in these games and just how much he'll be able to come back from what obviously was probably a pretty rough ankle injury.
Yeah, absolutely. I think that's going to be important for him. And I think too, just like this summer is so crucial for him. Like he needs whatever Grant Williams like shooting workout was like,
yeah.
Nesmith is starting from a higher place than where Grant started from. Like Nesmith already was a good 3-point shooter. He's got to find it again, whatever it takes to get him to like find that shot again. Cause I mean, this is just crucial times for him. He needs to show some stuff here soon.
He does, but when that's your biggest problem, if you're the Celtics right now, you're in a pretty good situation.
Yeah, that was more of an Aaron Nesmith problem, not a
exactly. That's like, yeah, like let's think about it, like 3 months ago to us being told then, being like, yeah, the Celtics' biggest concerns right now, it's gonna be like, yeah, Aaron Nesmith really hasn't, been able to break through, despite the fact that the Celtics have won 80% of their last games over the last 2 months. Like it's I don't know if this is probably one of the most historic turnarounds in NBA history. Like you see season to season turnarounds. I don't know whether you see like mid-season turnarounds like this. We'll see if it sustains, but I mean, can you think of any, like in any sport, it's like really tough to see like anything like this.
Yeah. I mean, I guess you could say the Mavs, like also this season,
right. Yeah.
Kind of a mirror there, but yeah, it's been wild. Like I think the game that I always go back to as the one where I really like I'm like, imagine telling yourself the night the Celtics lost to the JV Timberwolves that by the end of the season, you would be like crowing about this team as a potential contender. Like it would, that to me is the game where it's just like that. This is the most unbelievable. That would have been the least the moment when I would have been least likely to believe what's happened since was that night when they just like, could not do anything about Jalen Noel.
Don't forget Greg Monroe.
Or Greg Monroe. Celtics legend.
It is. I think that's perfect because like that game and then like the JV Clippers game when they lost at home and like went like 2 of like 30. Like those are the 2 that you're just like, yeah, this is gonna be a long season. And then it was like, now this, I don't know, Tom, this is a boring team right now. Just a lot of boring wins. Just like, yeah, boring old ball movement all over the place. Ime was like, good. The Thunder gave us a little bit of a scare here. I can actually like keep everyone out here for crunch time minutes for the first time on the trip. That was pretty funny on Monday night, but it's we'll see. The level of competition does stack up quickly here. You got Utah coming in, Minnesota, Toronto, and Miami are the next 4. So the good vibes could go away quickly, but based on how things are looking, I mean, it wouldn't surprise me if they just keep rolling here.
Yeah, the good vibes also could have gone away on a West Coast road trip, but instead they're 4-0. So
right, exactly. It's like 3-1 would have been a good trip. Nope.
Yeah, exactly.
All right. Well, make sure you're following Tom on Twitter at Tom_NBA. Check out all his stuff on Boston.com. He has great takeaways on a nightly basis there on all these stuff. And that's about it. We will talk to you guys next week. The Celtics only have 1 game, Tom. We're gonna have like some downtime for a change here. It's gonna be nice.
I know. I can't wait. I'm gonna get some sleep.
Right? Yeah. Seriously. The scandals breaking in the 10:30 games. We're not running down. We need Steve Kerr going off and Smart when it's like 12 o'clock at night. That's not good for us. Not good for our sleeping habits, but more rest awaits. So thanks again, Tom, for coming on, and we will talk to you guys next week.